Privileged today to be introducing two speakers and a moderator to discuss the issues that are coming up in the Arizona legislature this coming year. I first caught this idea. I called Kate McGee and I said, who would you recommend as a Democrat counterpart so that we can have a balanced discussion of what are the issues facing Arizona? And she immediately said, oh, that's easy, Sean Bowie. And what's impressed me as this program has come together is the collegial respect and professionalism between these two legislators, one Democrat, one a Republican. And so it's my very distinct privilege to be introducing them today. First, I'll introduce Kate Brophy McGee, who is serving her second term in the state Senate. Previous to that, she served 3 terms in the legislature, her District 28. Her leadership in the Senate extends to health and human services, education, ethics, and legislative oversight of the Department of Child Services. She also serves on the Arizona Human Trafficking Council with Cindy McCain, on the Council for Child Safety and Family Empowerment with First Lady Angela Ducey, and co-chairs the Commission to Prevent Violence Against Women, an impressive record, and of course she is also a member of Rotary 100. Sean Bowie is also serving his second term in the state Senate, serves on the State Senate Appropriations, Finance, and Commerce Committees. His focus also includes increasing education investment at all levels. He's a graduate of ASU with degrees in political science and history. He also has a master's degree in public policy and management from the Carnegie Mellon University. Prior to serving in the Senate, he worked at the ASU Provost Office on such issues as expanding need-based financial aid for working families, increasing resources for first-year ASU students, expanding online education opportunities, all vital needs of our university and our education system. He's also a professor of practice at ASU's School of Public Affairs. Are you a Rotarian by any chance? No, somebody grab him before he gets out and finds out that there are also Rotary clubs in Tempe. But it's my distinct privilege to welcome Sean to Rotary 100. Come up and please join us, Sean. Finally, Jaime Molera, who formerly had been the Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction, as well as past president of the Arizona State Board of Education. He is now a principal of Molera Alvarez, a government and public affairs firm. He is chairman of the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce Public Affairs Committee, serves on the board of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, has also been a political commentator on air, and he's recognized as one of the 50 most influential leaders in Arizona and one of the 100 most influential Hispanic leaders in the country. It's a very distinct privilege to welcome Jaime to the record.
Well, good afternoon. It is a pleasure for me to be here, and as Roger mentioned, I am a recovering politician, and one of the steps for my recovery is recognizing that people don't care what I have to say anymore. So one of the things I want to do is make sure that I get the most out of our guests, our senators here, and I do want to save some time at the end. I know there's interest in folks that might want to ask questions. I do ask, though, that you keep your questions brief, keep your questions in the form of a question, so we don't have a lot of statements, but real questions that we want to get at some of the policy issues. And one of the things I'm told is that we can keep talking after 1:30, but I'm told at 1:30 this stops. So I'll make sure that we'll get done quickly. But first off, I just wanted to say to both senators, I mean, they, as Roger mentioned, they have a tremendous reputation of being, I don't want to use the term nonpartisan. They're certainly partisan in their beliefs and in what they fight for, but they really have the ability, which is not too common, of working together to solve issues. But one of the issues right now, and I'll ask both of you, that's the perception, is that the public feels that there's atrophy within government at all levels. I mean, you certainly see it at the national level, but even times at the state level, that there's a sense of. And I just wanted to get your thoughts. Is that more of the perception, or is it the reality? And just what's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us. A real pleasure to be here today. I think there's some truth to that. I think there's this perception, especially at the national level, of Washington politics that, oh, Democrats hate Republicans, Republicans hate Democrats, they can't agree on anything. That's not really my experience. I mean, I never served in the House. The state House is a little different. It's twice as many members. It's a lot more partisan. It's usually younger members. And the House is not nearly as collegial as the Senate. I mean, the Senate, it's 30 of us. I always think of it as like being in high school again, and you spend the same day with the same 30 people, and you tend to get along pretty well, and yeah, we disagree on some things, but at least for the Senate, I'll let Kate add to this as well, but I think in the Senate we all get along really well for the most part, and what most people don't realize is 90% of the bills that we vote on are unanimous or pretty close to unanimous. I mean, there's a few big issues that we sometimes fight about, but everyone's there to represent their constituents, and that's something that I try to keep in mind and try to put myself in their shoes and realize, you know, everyone has a different experience growing up and living in their district, so they might have different beliefs, but we're all there to help our constituents. And it's really important that we know that and that we respect one another, and even though we do disagree on some things, I think for the most part, we get along pretty well.
Thank you. Sean's absolutely right. He stole my talking point. 90% of the legislation, it's actually a higher percentage, 95% of the bills that go through are largely either unanimous or close to it. You might pull a couple of no votes, but they're mostly unanimous. I'm grateful for people down there like Sean, because if I look at the national level and just throw my hands up, it really seems like politics has taken over, and partisanship and people and policies have been lost along the way, and it's very sad. But down at the Arizona legislature, you know, we're able to put it together, particularly in the Senate. We had a little drama there at the end of this last session, but I think it wound up making it a better outcome from a budget and final bills through. Sine die is what they call it. It is a very, very different reality on the ground once you get to work together and know each other and understand that we're all down to solve problems. We may have differences of opinion as to how you solve those problems, but if you can put those solutions together and come up with a compromise that pulls a bipartisan vote, then you pretty much hit it right on the head.
So in fairness to the House members, when I have House members on, they say the Senate's crazy. So just tell you. But let me ask you about political parties. You know, it seems like political parties often, the party apparatus will exacerbate these issues. When there's Democratic parties wanting to censor Kirsten Sinema for not being Democrat enough. The Republican Party, as we remember, censored John McCain for not being Republican enough. And it just seems like that becomes the reality of a lot of folks, that, oh, well, we have to be this partisan because we'll get attacked by our own party apparatus.
So there have been days when I've left the legislature and gone home for the day, and I can't think of a single person on either side of the aisle that isn't angry at me about something I said or did. And then I think, well, I guess it must have been a pretty good day. I look at what almost happened to Senator Sinema, and it did bring back memories of John McCain. I think she's doing it exactly right down the middle. You are down there at the Arizona legislature to understand an issue, be informed about an issue, and do what you think is right. And being able to stand up against your party or the party on the other side and do what you think is right, it gets easier as you go along.
And this is something that Kate and I talk about all the time. I think the term she uses, we're in the miserable middle. Is that what you call it? There's really not a lot of us, and the way that the districts are drawn in Arizona, I mean, this is true all over the country, is there are very few competitive districts, and we represent 2 of those districts. So most of our colleagues are either in safely Republican districts or safely Democratic districts, and for them, it's like getting through the primary. And it's not about the general election representing everybody, it's just those in your party. So, I'm a Democrat, I get accused of being a secret Republican. Kate's a Republican, she gets accused of being a secret Democrat. We get a lot of grief from both of our sides, and it's incredibly, incredibly frustrating. Because I ran for office to work on policy and get things done. I'm the first Democrat to ever represent my district in the Senate, so I'd like to think I know what I'm doing. But to hear some of this criticism, it can be really frustrating. And some of our worst days are really getting criticism from our own sides. And it's people not understanding, what we're trying to do or the people that we're trying to represent. So I'm there every day, and Kate's there every day. We're fighting for our constituents, and that's how we view our jobs. And there are times where I'll vote with the majority, and there'll be times where Kate votes with the minority. I mean, we're just doing what we think is best for our districts. And getting through that and getting our parties to understand that can be difficult sometimes. And I would argue it's more difficult now than it was a couple years ago, because things have gotten so tribal, have gotten so partisan at the national level, and that tends to seep down to the local level. So it might only get worse as we go into next year. It's a presidential year. There's going to be a lot more energy. Arizona is going to be a big focal point at the national level with the presidential race, the U.S. Senate race, the legislature. So we're going to try to go into session in January and keep doing what we're doing, but it has gotten more difficult over time.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the big issues that you've been dealing with the last couple of years. And of course, the biggest one that comes to mind is education, right? You have efforts by what's called Invest in Ed. There's Red for Ed movements. There's people that have come out and protested and said that we're woefully inadequate in funding. The numbers show that at least over the last 3 years, starting with Proposition 123, that added about $300 million a year. And then the monies that were put in by the 20% by 2020 effort that was done to increase teacher pay primarily, it's been fairly significant. And I guess my question is, do you believe, even with significant resources that have been coming, you probably will do another significant increase this year, that this effort to increase taxes in one way, shape, or form is going to still have traction within the public?
So I think there have been some proposals that have been put out there to increase taxes, whether it's property taxes, also income taxes on the wealthy, that haven't gone over well. Looking back at what we've done since 2015, we've put in general fund monies alone $1.5 billion into K-12 education, $1.5 billion. And we are not yet at the high water mark of proposed spending that we were in 2008. But I would caution that we never hit that. 2008 was when the recession hit. We had budgeted to spend X amount of dollars on K-12. It was a 19% growth projection. The revenues tanked and went the other way. So we never hit that 2008 high water mark. We are close to evening out, to exceeding the 2008 water mark. It has taken a long time. We've been in the recession a long time. But the $1.5 billion that I mentioned does not include Proposition 123. So I put forward a penny sales tax proposal to increase the 0.6 cent sales tax to 1 cent. It wasn't a popular measure with both my conservative colleagues and many of my friends on the other side of the aisle. I'm going to come back with that. And then some long-term proposals that we could look at related to the state land trust and continuing with Prop 123 now that we know it's sustainable, and reforming our state land trust with the idea that we turn it more into an endowment that really truly does fund education. But most of the initiatives down there, for various reasons, are not gaining any traction.
But you, before we leave, you were also at the heart of extending Proposition 301, right? You want to talk a little bit about that?
So a year ago, when we did the 20 by 2020, my friend, Representative Doug Coleman from Queen Creek, and I put forward a proposition to legislatively extend Prop 301 because we were coming up on a cliff. It was going to expire in 2021. If it didn't go back to the voters, We had another way to do it, which was to legislatively extend it. It had not a prayer of success. Everybody laughed when we introduced the bill. By the end of the session, it was brought forward and passed with significant majorities in the House, a 3/4 or more majority in the House and the Senate. So never say never on this.
I remember when we talked about that extension and people thought we didn't have a chance, and we actually got it done, which was great. Back to the original question, we have made some progress, particularly in 2018. That's a budget that I supported. They ended up doing a 10% raise for teachers. Even with this additional investment, some of this increase in spending is required. I mean, it's with the growth that we're seeing as a state, so keep that in mind. But even with all of that increase, Arizona is still 48th or so in terms of per pupil investment in our schools. We're still not back to that 2008 level that we were before the recession. You look at other metrics like not having enough counselors in our schools. We have the worst student to counselor ratio in the country. So while we have made some progress, we still have a long way to go. And I was a little disappointed in our budget this year because we had an opportunity to be really aggressive about this. We had $1 billion surplus. We have about a $12 billion state budget. We had $1 billion surplus, and the governor, we put over half of it in the state rainy day fund, which is good. I mean, we want some savings for a rainy day, but we look at our needs in our K-12 schools, and I would have argued that should have been a larger priority. We also did a pretty large tax cut in our budget as well, which is going to come out to about $400 million a year ongoing, which, again, some of that could have been used for K-12. So we don't need to just talk about raising revenue. We can also look at the revenue that we have in our budget and a series of decisions over the last 6, 7, 8 years where there have been other priorities. If it's tax cuts, if it's the rainy day fund, dollars that could have been spent into education. So going forward, revenue is going to be part of the conversation, but also looking at our existing state budget. K-12 is half our state budget. It's $6 billion a year. But we have definite needs. We see it when we go to our schools. I was at 2 of my schools this morning and talking about the need for more counselors and the need for smaller class sizes. These are issues all across the state, and I like to see us make it a more significant priority in our state budget process going forward.
So for the last several years, we talked a lot about the revenue and the money and trying to get more dollars. But it seems as though there's been a dearth of discussion on achievement and outcomes and accountability. Very good friend of mine talked about, well, I support the notion of 20 by 2020, of giving a 20% increase, but I'd also like to see a 20% increase in achievement. And so what are things that are being proposed that will bring back the discussion of how do we assess how we're going to gain and what we need to do in order to affect a better achievement in Arizona?
I think metrics are important. I think accountability is important, and that's something that we've worked on over the last number of years. I think there's more we can do, but again, I mean, when funding has been cut to this degree, when we have the highest teacher turnover rate in the country, we lose 1/3 of our teachers every 3 years. When we look at class sizes that are some of the largest in the country, when we have over I was at a school in my district this morning, there's over 1,000 kids there and they have 1 counselor for over 1,000 students. So it's hard to meet those metrics if you have 35 kids in a classroom and you're losing teachers every year, and it's got to be a combination of both. You absolutely have to have accountability and you have to have metrics, but the resources also have to be there, because if you don't have the resources, it's hard to hit those metrics. So I would be willing to support, if we're going to have additional investment, having additional metrics and accountability in there as well. I think that's a fair trade, but we've got to make sure that those resources are getting into the schools.
So my focus has been to restore funding to a certain minimum level. In talking to the business community and other entities out there, that's why the penny sales tax became the stopping place, because there were proposals out there for $0.015. More and more people are saying what reforms are going to accompany the additional funding, looking at the results of the Arizona Aims. What are the reforms? We have put reforms out there and reform bills out there, for instance, to phase out desegregation funding, which is in some of the districts. They've not been, those proposals have not been well received by many of my friends on the other side of the aisle. So I do think we need to have those serious conversations. I want to dial it back a little bit on teachers and teachers leaving the profession. it's not just teachers leaving Arizona schools, it's teachers leaving the profession. When you look at the number of teachers that Arizona State is recruiting to the Teachers College, that number is declining. There are fewer and fewer people who are picking teaching as a profession because it just doesn't pay. That's why the most successful initiative that we've had as far as replacing teachers and growing new teachers has been through the Teachers Academy, where you go through the academy 4 years, your tuition is paid for, and you leave the university debt-free. You have teaching requirements here in the state. And I think we need to pursue more programs like that. The other thing, since I was on a school board for 10 years, as the funds are infused back into the districts, and believe me, I cut a lot of budgets, we need to put the light back to the governing board members with all respect and all thanks about how they are prioritizing the budgets that they have. Many districts are dealing with declining enrollment. That means even if you get more money, you get less money, and it necessitates playing the class size card. It necessitates a lot of unpleasant choices. So I think we need to go back out to our district governing boards and our partners out there and say, what are you doing that you think is working to improve working conditions for teachers in the classroom? I know I've been going on a long time, but the other thing is that Sean has been a real leader in working on behavioral health issues in schools. He can tell you about the mental health training bill that he got passed. I think Arizona has been very innovative over the past 2 years in introducing behavioral health services into the schools. So we need to back away a little bit from that counselor per pupil ratio and look at how we're delivering behavioral health in the schools. And it's a public-private partnership. I'm doing a lot of work on that in the interim. Access to those behavioral health dollars by schools has increased 251% over just 2 years of implementation. These are programs that are badly needed, and we are getting those resources to the schools.
So before we leave education, I also was remiss, and I told the senators that everything they say today is off the record. So no tweets, no social media posts about anything they say if you find it objectionable. oh, sorry about that. Higher education, we see a boom in what's happening with our university system. You see growth, you see a lot of construction, but yet there's also that perception. I've seen some polling data that shows there's a bigger concern from families, middle-class families, believing that higher education is affordable anymore. I mean, what are some of the things that I know, Sean, you've been working on this quite a bit, and your background lends to that?
Oh, don't get me started. Okay. One of the reasons why I ran for office in the first place was my frustration with our legislature when it comes to its commitment and focus on higher education. We've cut more from higher education than any state in the country since 2008, and it's really not close. Tuition has increased at the highest rate in Arizona of any state in the country since 2008. When I graduated from ASU in 2008, don't get mad at me if you have kids or grandkids in college right now, but when I graduated in 2008, tuition in-state was $4,000 a year. Now it's $11,000 a year, so it's tripled almost in 11 years. The average cost of attendance for an in-state student is over $25,000 a year. These are things I worked on when I worked at ASU. So we've made cuts to higher education, unlike K-12, where we made cuts to K-12 and some of that has been restored, not all of it. A lot of it has not been restored for higher ed. And when we talk to our colleagues at the legislature, it's really hard to get support from some of them to support higher education. Because there's this belief that, ASU is growing and the dollars aren't going into the classroom, they're going to President Crow and they're going to administration and buildings, and that's just really not the case. ASU is doing a lot of amazing things, so are U of A and NAU, so it's been really difficult to get support. We have been able to do some things. We passed a big university bonding bill in 2017 that is going to free up about $1 billion in bonding revenue for them to go out and expand their research capabilities. So those of you who have been to the Biodesign Institute at ASU, that new building, the medical school at U of A downtown, all of that is being funded through that program. But it is becoming more and more unaffordable. I mean, I've introduced legislation every year to try to restore a financial aid program at the state level to try to get more support. I want to do a 2-year scholarship for community college students. So community college, we don't fund our community colleges in Maricopa County at the state level at all. Only state in the country that I know of that doesn't do that. So every year I try to run a bill to get more community college support. So when we talk about the budget, we talk about education. I know K-12 is an important focus, and it should be. But when we talk about workforce development, when we talk about the kind of 21st century jobs that we want to bring to Arizona, we have to invest in higher education. We have to do public-private partnerships. We have to make it more of a priority, because what we're doing now by all these cuts and not restoring that investment, that's hurting our economic viability long term. Other states are making these investments, and it's not just California. It's Utah, it's Nevada, it's Colorado, and we're not. And it's really disappointing to me, and it's something that I'm working on. I know Kate's working on it, but we really need to make it more of a priority at the state level. Sorry, I'll stop now.
So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Yes, sir.
A couple of months ago, the Water Institute was here, and they were indicating there's a lot of waste, financial waste in the school system. Some districts are getting monies they don't need, getting materials, whatever. Have you guys ever kind of looked at that to make sure that the money we're spending on education is being spent wisely? And by the way, thank you guys both for being here.
Thank you, Bear. Was Goldwater talking about the K-12 system?
Yes.
So I think the money in K-12 is siloed, and for many years I've argued for more flexibility in K-12 funding, because if you have a growing district with newer buildings, it's going to be very different than a district with level or declining enrollment in older buildings. You need to have the ability the flexibility with how you use your funds. I spoke about it earlier. For the past 8 years, it's been hold it together however you can, because there simply was no money, and cuts were made differently. I think as money flows back into the system, which it is doing on a sustained and sustainable rate, then this is the opportunity to take a look and reconfigure and look for efficiencies. With all due respect to the Goldwater Institute, I think they tend to overstate or oversimplify a very, very complicated issue, because it will vary from district to district. But that's why it's important we elect really good, really engaged governing boards, and that they stay close to the operations, which is what I used to do as a governing board member.
Yes, ma'am.
Just answer that, add to that really quickly. Kate took my
And
answer a
you're
little
next.
bit. But yeah, it really does depend on the school district. I mean, my major school district that I have, most of the schools are about 30 years old now, and they need new roofs and HVAC systems, so that's different from a district like Gilbert, where all the schools are brand new. I did read a report recently. Arizona, the average administrative cost per student, when you look at 50 states, we're in the bottom 5 in the country in terms of the average administrative cost. It depends district by district, obviously, but at least my school district in the East Valley, some of the lowest rates in the country. So that's something that Goldwater is going to say, because they're Goldwater, but when you look at the actual data and the actual facts, we compare really well nationally on the average administrative costs.
Why are there so many school districts in Phoenix?
People like their districts the way that they're formatted. People like, it's like, yeah, we need to fix all this, but you better leave my district alone, or you better leave my school alone, you better not mess with my school. So when it becomes personal to the parents and the community, the whole picture changes. What I could suggest, if you look at alignment or consolidation, and what my proposal has been for many years, is to align districts as K-12 districts, so that you don't get the finger pointing when you ship a kid from K-8 to the high schools, and that child is not prepared, that student is not prepared. So I think there are things that we could do, but that is embedded in Arizona's education system. You should probably ask Jaime, he was superintendent of public instruction.
By the way, I can tell you're from Nogales. That was a heck of a question, so congratulations.
So I'll add to what Kate said. We sometimes hear a lot of talk about, people will say the number of school districts in Arizona, and they'll say, oh my God, we have hundreds of school districts. Most of those are in rural areas where you've got maybe one school, and that's a school district. But here in the Phoenix area, I mean, I represent 5 school districts, including the 2 largest in the state. I have parts of Mesa and Chandler. Mesa is, 60,000 students. Chandler is over 40. All of my districts are over 10,000 students. I view this as a local decision because people are obviously very passionate about their neighborhood schools. They went there as kids, now their kids are going there. There was a bill this year that would have mandated that all school districts had to be unified school districts. And my response to that is, this should be a local decision. And if the local area wants to be a unified district, if they want to be a slightly smaller district, that should be up to them. Because if we were to support some kind of mandatory consolidation unified school district bill, we'd be run out of town. Because people like having that local control. They have local school boards. I mean, you look at a district like Mesa, the whole city of Mesa is one school district, and they have 5 board members. Their district, yeah, and Chandler is a very large one as well. Chandler is 300,000 people. So there are some big districts, some small ones. I think we both agree. I mean, it should be a local decision.
So there are a couple of districts, of 2 very small rural districts up north that are trying to unify, and Sylvia Allen has brought this bill. You would not believe the turf wars between the two about how the property tax base is allocated, how leadership and everything is, it's a very tough fight.
So we have time for a 30-second question and then a 15-second answer. Yes, sir.
I pay federal taxes, but I pay no state taxes. I've talked to Kate ad nauseum about the tax credit and how that's robbing the state of revenue. Is that ever going to come back for a rethink?
Are you talking about the education tax credits, sir?
All the tax
Okay.
credits, the charity tax credits. I mean, many of us don't pay state taxes. We just pay these organizations.
It's a couple of things. I would hope that it would come back and be revisited, in particular where those monies go. But what I have come to learn over the last 9 years is voters, taxpayers love to designate exactly where their tax dollars go. And the longer the system's in place, the more used they get to it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a rousing applause. I think you would agree we can talk for a lot longer. So thank you.